Okay, Chairman, we're now on YouTube. You can start the meeting.
Mr. Kidd, could you set your microphone to mute, please, so that you know you're... Thank you. Okay, right, so we'll start the meeting. So welcome to this virtual meeting of the Eastern Committee. My name is Councillor Richard Cole, and I'm the chairman of this committee. And this evening I'm supported by officers Zach Elwood, Head of Planning and Economic Development, Beth Helen-Smith, Development Manager. Is Beth here?
No, Chair.
No,
sorry, Chair, she's on leave today. Sorry,
right,
Chair.
so not Beth. Catherine Pearson, Area Team Leader, Kate Edwards, Principal Planning Officer, Tracy Farthing, Planning Officer, Lewis Jones, Planning Lawyer, and Kimberly Sohn, who's a Democratic Services Officer who is clerking this meeting. So members and officers, as you're aware, please use the raise hand function within Zoom to indicate you wish to speak. And I think last time it worked fairly well. So, and of course, if you could remember to lower your hand after you've spoken, it saves us someone's having to do it. And of course, keep yourselves on mute when you're not speaking. And the clerk and others will turn you off if you leave your mic on. So don't expect your mic is on if you don't speak for a while. And we will be timing speeches this evening, and the normal 4-minute rule will apply. As we've discussed, if any member of the meeting loses their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them to rejoin the meeting. And officers are trying to keep an eye on people to make sure that they haven't dropped off. If the webcast stream fails, then we will have to adjourn, as the meeting has to be seen in public. So. And I believe one of the officers is monitoring that, so they will tell us if the webcast has failed. So moving on to item 1, Kimberly, are there any apologies?
No apologies, Chair.
And committee, can we agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 1st of July?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Yes, normally I think we just note them, but anyway, apparently it's agreed this time. Are there any declarations of interest that have been declared before the meeting, Kimberly?
No, Chairman.
Are there any that the committee wish to declare now? Any member of the committee? Councillor Wilson? You're on mute. Councillor Wilson, you're on mute.
Just to tell you, Chairman, I have not got the raised hand facility.
Okay, we'll try and keep an eye on you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, are there any questions from members of the public?
None submitted, Chairman.
And any from members?
No, Chairman.
And I suppose I'll ask Zach, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that we should be aware of?
Just to say that the Business and Planning Bill has gone through its second reading in the House of Lords. We're anticipating it will have its final reading next week, and then will come into effect, come into statute shortly thereafter. And this relates to things like, pavement licenses and to extended construction hours and various other minor changes to reflect the response to COVID-19. But we'll send round details as and when the legislation comes into force.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, applications for planning permission, and I've got a note. Please, as you're aware, the polling feature has been set up so that the votes on the following items can be taken by general assent or by using polling. Generally, we've used polling in the past. And if a recorded vote is required, this will be done by roll call. So we're moving on to item 8, application subject to public speaking. Now, given what was been discussed before the meeting started, I'm going to take the item to do with the Caesar's Place first, and see if there's anything anyone wants to raise here. So I understand that from Zach that following a request by Councillor Follows, pointing out that a site visit which was requested at the last meeting long ago has not happened, then we should not proceed with the that particular item this evening. Is that correct, Zach?
Yeah, my recommendation would be that that the item is deferred to a later meeting to enable a site visit to happen. Apologies to members. Obviously, the decision to have a site visit was pre the COVID emergency. Since then, we did feel that it would be possible for members to visit the site independently to take a view, but that wasn't communicated properly to members. So in the interests of fairness and democracy to all parties, both the applicants and the speakers, my recommendation from as head would be that the matter is deferred to a future meeting, and apologies to members for any inconvenience, and particularly to the public speaker who was down to speak on this item if members do resolve to defer the item. But I think it would be in the best interests of the council and all parties.
Okay, and the way forward is to assess whether a physical meeting can happen, an organised physical meeting. If it can happen, it'll be organised. If it can't happen, then something else will be. There'll be a direction to members to go individually.
Yes.
And one of those two will happen before the. With luck, this will happen soon.
Yeah, certainly. We're confident that a joint site visit could be convened from a public vantage point, but it depends whether or not members feel that they would need to get access, full access to the site. We think possibly it's not necessary. We can convene a site meeting and show you the key public visible points and make an assessment there. Okay. But we will come back to members on that, of course. The next meeting is in 2 weeks. We'll certainly try our best to try and convene a site visit between now and then. If not, I'm afraid it would have to be the meeting after. Thank you.
Okay. Is that agreeable to the committee? Are there anyone who wishes to defer? Councillor Wilson.
Would it be possible that if some members were able to go, there are others who might not be, that we do a video of the site visit with the members that are able to go?
I don't know whether we have that technology in the council. We'll take that under advisement, Councillor Wilson. I understand the logic. We'll see if it's possible. Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much. I very much support this. I was going to raise a similar point myself, but I did have a question to ask. I just wanted to be clear. I'm not sure whether this one is actually part of a planning permission, which I think it is, or whether it's one of these prior application things that we've dealt with recently elsewhere. But in either event, I just wanted to check out whether any further delay could in some way prejudice our ability to determine this matter in terms of the applicant getting rights in terms of either non-determination or non-determination within an agreed period. I thought that was just a proper question to ask.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I?
Zach, yeah.
Can I come back? Yeah, no, it's a full application, planning application. So there's no deemed consent granted should we not determine within a certain period. The applicant would have the right, of course, to appeal against non-determination, but appeals can take a long time. And given that they've already seen the recommendation from officers is to grant permission. I mean, obviously that's a matter for the committee, not us, but they've seen the officer's recommendation is favourable. I think the risk of an appeal against non-determination is limited. But it would certainly take them longer to get a determination through the inspectorate that way than to wait 2 to 4 weeks for members to make a resolution. Of course, if the decision is ultimately to refuse permission, they would then have the right to appeal in any case against the decision. But there's no risk of it getting approval by default. Sorry, is the short version.
That's very helpful and reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, I think with that we've determined that one what to do next, so we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Okay, so we'll move on to item A1, land at Fairhaven, Ewhurst Road, Cranley. Erection of 2 buildings to provide 8 dwellings. Kate, you want to make a presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And Kimberly, it's from slide 8 on the presentation, which you have the link for. Thank you.
Is it showing, Kate?
Hello. Yes, it is. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm afraid it's at the start of the presentation, so it's 8 slides in from here. If
Apologies, I thought I
sorry.
had.
Sorry, Kimberly.
That's all right. Let me just go back to it.
Thank you all.
There we are.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, everyone. The presentation is here. So the application before us is for demolition of the existing building and outbuildings and the erection of 2 buildings to accommodate 8 new dwellings. So here we can see the location plan. The road that you can see to the north and east of the application site is Nuthurst Avenue, with Ewhurst Road running to the front of the screen there. As you can see, there's some variety in housing properties and plot sizes within the area, and some semi-detached properties, but predominantly detached dwellings. And now here you can see the proposed site plan. The outline of the existing building is shown there in blue by the hatched line, and the proposed buildings are included in white, with building B being to the left-hand side of the screen and building A being closer towards Nuthurst Avenue. As you can see, a number of parking spaces would be provided in the forecourt, and there would be 16 spaces in total, I believe. The existing access would be retained onto Nuthurst Avenue, albeit with improvements to the visibility displays beyond the current situation. Thank you very much, Kimberly. And here you can see the proposed elevations on the principal elevations of the 2 buildings, with building B as it would appear onto Ewhurst Road, and building A, again, the elevation which would be predominantly visible from Ewhurst Road. And here we can see some proposed ground floor plans, which in essence indicate that in building B there would be 2 2-bedroom units on the ground floor, with all the usual facilities you would expect, and bedrooms to the front of the building and amenity space to the rear. And equally with building A, there would be a single bedroom, a 2-bedroom flat, which would also have private amenity space. And looking now at some photos of the site, you can see on the left-hand side there an image taken from within the garden. So you can see that the main rear garden area behind the existing dwelling is predominantly laid to lawn, albeit with shrub and tree planting. On the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see the existing property at Fairhaven alongside the existing outbuildings in the foreground, with Nuthurst Avenue and the existing access visible in the foreground there. And here you can see on the left-hand side the view looking up Nuthurst Avenue towards the properties that are to the rear of the site from Ewhurst Road. And on the right you can see an image of the application property from on Ewhurst Road. So as you can see, as it is, there's an existing very well established band of hedge screening there. And just to confirm, the officer recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the conditions and informatives outlined in the schedule you've received. I just would like to, in relation to that, draw members' attention to the update sheets which were sent out earlier today, which relate to changes to both to the schedule of conditions and some response to representations. So if you just bear with me a minute, I will get my copy of that schedule to hand. So we've received, I believe it's 2 additional representations, meaning that we now have a total of 38 objections to the scheme. The one matter that's raised as a new matter within those representations is that there's some concern that the officer's report didn't provide sufficient clarity in the way it reported a previous representation. The commenter has stated that they wish to reiterate that Nuthurst Avenue is a private road, and that the existing property doesn't have a right of easement over that private road for the existing access. My comment on that as officer to advise the committee is that the access is existing. It's not proposed to be moved. It's just proposed to be improved in terms of visibility. And ultimately, the legal easement isn't a matter for the planning system. We've also received an additional consultee response, which is from the Highway Authority. They provide some further detail as to their assessment of the scheme, and in effect indicate that they feel that the improved visibility would create an improvement to the existing access, which would offset the additional trip generation. And then just a few changes to the schedule of conditions. Condition 6 on the schedule of conditions relates to securing 2 matters. In light of the representation from the Highway Authority, it's proposed that that is now split into 2 conditions, with the details of bicycle storage to be in accordance with the approved plans, and the details of the Sustainable Travel Information Pack to be secured via information which is submitted to us for approval. And thank you. That's everything in the update sheet at the end of my presentation, Chair. Thank you.
So in the end, the recommendation will be that condition 6 be deleted and be replaced by these 2 conditions.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Open to members to make any comment. Anyone wish to speak on this item?
Sorry, Chairman, you do have a public speaker.
I'm sorry, do apologise. It says here quite clearly. Sorry, Mr. Kidd, I was skipping over you. Right, Mr. Kidd, you have your...
Sorry to interrupt, but constitutionally, we have to ensure that everybody is present at this meeting and hearing the presentations. If members obscure their vision, turn off their vision, we don't know if they're still with us. I know Councillor Gale had turned hers off, and I think it's important that all members of the committee have their vision on if they're going to be able to vote.
Councillor Gale is not a member of this committee, so she's perfectly free to...
And if I may raise a point of order as well, Councillor Cole, my understanding is the Constitution doesn't appropriately cover Zoom meetings in this particular regard, and I'm not sure you can easily outright state that a member whose video is not on is not present. Otherwise, we would have to disbar members who were only dialed in by phone from being members of the committee at all. So I don't think we can make that statement absolutely.
Well, I believe that I'm not aware that I don't see any members now who are obscuring their members of the committee who are doing that. So at the moment, that doesn't seem to be relevant anyway. Right, Mr. Kidd, you have 4 minutes to make your presentation. So please proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and allowing me to put forward some of the most important material objections to the development from local residents. Over the last 2.5 years, there have been a total of over 90 separate objections to this proposed development from Cranley's residents and the parish council, not just those immediately affected. These objections focus on 3 key areas: inappropriate density, the negative impact on the surrounding area, and safety. I'll now address each one of these in turn. Number 1, inappropriate density. The development of 8 flats is not in any way in keeping with the local area and is not needed to help meet the local authority's quota for housing. The density of the proposal is around 4 times that of the surrounding area, and there is nothing of its kind within a mile of the location. It's a vastly oversized development that is simply not required here. Number 2, the negative impact on the surrounding area. The immediate area will be directly affected by a loss of privacy, increased traffic, and the potential to kill an established oak tree on Nuthurst Avenue. We are not in any way convinced that Building A can be built without causing catastrophic damage to the tree's root system going directly under the building. A further 8 trees within the plot will also be felled as part of this proposal. Number 3, safety. Most importantly, the risk to Cranleigh's pedestrians and road users will be significantly increased by this proposal. The development is where a pedestrian road crossing, footpath, regularly used bus stop, and the entrance to Nuthurst Avenue all converge. This makes the proposed entrance to the development a high-risk location. Hundreds of school children and families use the road, pavement and footpath that passes directly across the development's proposed entrance 7 days a week. For most school children, this footpath network is the safest route to get to and from 4 of the schools in the area, avoiding the increasingly busy Ewhurst Road. With parking for a minimum of 16 cars expected, disregarding deliveries and visitors, this will more than double the traffic emerging from Nuthurst Avenue each day. Given that there is a high likelihood of overflow parking occurring on Nuthurst Avenue, an unadopted private single-track cul-de-sac, access for service and emergency vehicles is also a major concern. Potential measures to mitigate any major safety concerns rely upon alterations that cannot be made by the owner, as they neither own nor have a legal right over any part of Nuthurst Avenue. Further mitigating measures, including critically an alternative footpath route within the development, have been ignored and dropped by the developer, and it appears that the planning officers. The failure to adequately address safety on the footpath ignores the needs of the local residents and put lives at risk. All the residents believe that it will only be a matter of time before one or more pedestrians or road users are severely injured or even killed. In summary, we have been incredibly disheartened to see that, above all, the safety implications and the wider impact on Cranleigh of this development have been entirely overlooked. If the development does happen to be approved, we would like it specifically to be on public record that the proposal was granted in direct opposition to the very real safety concerns, and Cranleigh's children, families, and the elderly were all overlooked. Every one of us urges the committee to continue to do the right thing for the community and reject this proposal. On behalf of all those affected, we thank you for seriously considering our objection.
Chairman, you're on mute.
Right, I have no other speakers, public speakers to speak on this, so we're on to the committee. So any member of the committee wish to speak on this item? I don't see any hands yet, but okay, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I very much appreciate the words of Mr. Kidd, and unfortunately, when this was refused previously, it was only refused on the grounds, I understand, of the bats and the presence of the bats. And Surrey Highways hasn't objected, and we have been advised, obviously, by our planning officers that the access and the easement across the private road is not a planning matter. So whilst I very much appreciate that, none of those reasons at this moment in time would stand up as a reason for refusal, I'm afraid, in my, in my experience, and it would be very difficult. It would just obviously, I think, go through on appeal. So whilst I totally appreciate and know the site very, very well, unfortunately, the grounds of the highways would be very difficult, in fact, almost impossible, I think. The item about the bats that was previously the reason for refusal, I noticed that there was some mitigation in the bat report that was required, which was to do with either bat tubes or bat boxes. but I don't see that highlighted any conditions anywhere. So I just wonder perhaps whether officers could inform me what is happening about that mitigation. It mentions about putting the bats, if any are found, into these bat boxes, but they don't seem to appear anywhere within the conditions. And also, from memory, when bats are present on site and an EPS license is required, it's either, I think, a condition we have on there, or at least an informative, and I can't seem to find those on there either. So I would like to find out what's going on those grounds, and also with the lighting that's been recommended. Again, from memory, where bats are present on the site, we usually say something about a lighting scheme in accordance with something like the Bat Conservation Trust. And again, I can't see that written anywhere. You know, I'm quite, if there's an all-encompassing statement being made, then I'm quite happy for that. But I would like that added. The other query I had, Kate, was the actual elevations on the presentation that were given. I thought the elevations had changed, and the ones you showed us looked very much like the previous ones. So if I refer you to page on our officer's report, page 15, it shows the proposed elevations, which look very different from the ones that were on the report, which looked like, on the presentation, which looked like the previous ones. So perhaps you could confirm that. And my final point, sorry, Chairman, my final point is on the bin provision. Again, normally environmental health comment on whether the bin provision is adequate, and I can't find that against the application. They have said what the bin provision should, roughly should be, but they haven't actually commented on it, and it does look quite small, the area that's been provided. So those are my points. It's the bat mitigation, the EPS license, the lighting scheme, the elevations, and also the bin provision. Thank you, Chairman.
I suggest we go through those one by one, because there are some of the key points there. So on bats, Kate, is there anything you can say in response to what?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So there are conditions recommended in relation to bats within the schedule which you have there in the report. I believe conditions 8 and 9. It's my view that they represented the requirements of Surrey Wildlife Trust through their comments to us. Notwithstanding that, I think, if you bear with me, so that they refer to being undertaken in accordance with the submitted mitigation scheme, but I appreciate, looking at the wording there, that probably doesn't directly refer to providing all of the mitigation described within the report, rather it's just to do with the strip out phase. So in that respect, Chair, if you would be happy, were there to be a motion to approve and an approval, we could make amendments to that condition to make it more clearly a requirement that the whole of the mitigation proposed within that documentation is provided. In relation to the lighting issue there, that's secured as condition 10. That doesn't refer specifically to the relevant guidance, which is because it's a condition requiring things to be submitted for approval, rather than a compliance condition. But notwithstanding that, we would be able to potentially add that in if there was a concern, just to make it very, very specific. Other issues. So in relation to whether an EPS license is required, I didn't recommend the standard informative in relation to this application, because it may be that because it's a day roost, isn't frequently used, it may be that an EPS license isn't required, and just a specialist contractor for that type of work would be sufficient assurance under the regulations. But again, notwithstanding that, we can attach an informative in line with the advice in the Surrey Wildlife Trust letter. So I'll make sure I've got a note of that. And then in relation to the bins, all I can say is that I would expect that our waste team would object to the proposal if they felt that there wasn't sufficient potential within the area identified for bin storage for the proposed bins to be accommodated. And thank you, Chair. I think that's everything.
I would suggest, on the lighting point, since the scheme does have to come back to us for approval, I think we can trust the officers to know about the bat issue. Whether we have to amend the condition just to influence our own officers, I'm not sure. But on the other points, I think before we come to the final motion, then we'll agree some conditionals or additional conditionals, just so we make sure at that point we've captured the points that Councillor Townsend was making. Councillor Townsend, do you want to come back on those points?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Yes, I would definitely. Even if the Bat Conservation Trust lighting scheme is an informative to the application, that would be really good. On the point of bin provision, I'm not satisfied on that point. It doesn't appear as if the Environmental Health have actually been have agreed the actual size of the bin area, and I think it's really important in this day and age where we have so many bins, and the overspill onto the front pavement could not happen really because of the bus stop there, and the overspill onto the side pavement could not happen because there is no real side pavement on the actual corner. So it is really important that these bins are contained within the site. So I think it really, I know it might seem a minor point, but it could end up as a very large point. And I did look through the application, and it doesn't appear as if our environmental health team have commented on it. So whether or not there is an opportunity to say, subject to them confirming that the space is adequate, then I think it's important that some comment is made. Otherwise, at this moment, that would be something that I couldn't agree with, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Zach, do you want to comment, please?
Oh, I was just to cover this. I was going to suggest that if members are concerned about this, we could add a condition requiring full details of refuse and recycling storage to be submitted to and approved in writing by the authority prior to the first occupation of the dwellings hereby approved. That would enable us to then consult again with Environmental Health if they haven't commented, and ensure that what they're proposing in terms of bin storage meets the council's requirements. That would be a way around it.
Okay. I think that covers Councillor Townsend's point. Okay, let's move on. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have strong reservations about this application. I do sadly have to accept the officer's observations that the right of access to Nuthurst Avenue is a civil matter, but I did note from the officer's presentation that part of Nuthurst Avenue appeared on the site plan as presented by the applicants. That doesn't show up on the documents that I had. I do have other strong reservations. It is a private road, single track, without the benefit of pavements, and it leads to a footpath, which, as the officers note, is very, very heavily used by adults and by a lot of children accessing 3 schools in the area, some on foot, some on bicycles. And I think there is a very real danger to health, safety, well-being of children and adults if this application goes ahead. I recognise that in the revised design, the applicant has made some concessions to the previous starkness of the buildings, but I still feel that these blocks of flats are very much out of keeping with the area, excuse me, and the existing properties in the near vicinity, and would be overly dominant in this residential area. I believe that the application constitutes an overdevelopment of the site within a predominantly residential area, that there is insufficient parking on site or within the wider area, and that would eventually cause huge inconvenience, not only to the residents of the flats if it goes ahead, but also to residents in the wider area. I also think that contrary to policy, this development would not provide a safe and attractive environment that would enhance the lives of the residents in the area. And I do believe that they have the right to be considered in this. I look forward to hearing comments from my colleagues, but I have very strong reservations on this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Like previous speakers, I'm strongly influenced by the fact that the sole reason for refusal of what's effectively the same proposal was the management of bat protection, and that aspect's now been addressed by condition. I fully appreciate the concern of local residents that this will represent an increase in building density, but it is a large plot, and I find the provision of 2-bedroom units in such a sustainable location something that the community as a whole should be welcoming in Cranley. I always look to the village design statement for guidance, and I believe that the proposal satisfies in general the requirements of that very well thought through document. So I've got a couple of aspects where I think strengthening of the conditions may be helpful, but overall I think our hands are tied on this one, unless colleagues can come up with some strong planning reasons that haven't yet been stated. My inclination will be to support this recommendation. So the first point I'd like to bring up relates to the welcome but slightly imprecise condition covering car charging points in condition 12. It states that each unit shall have a charging point. So this I interpret to mean a total of a minimum of 8 charging points. However, there are 16 parking slots. So if parking is not allocated parking, and there's no mention of that in the report, then it's hard to see how guaranteed access to charging points can be provided. I believe that to satisfy the intent of ensuring access to fast charging for each unit, we need to either specify allocated parking with 1 charging point per pair of spaces, or we need to specify that all parking spaces have charging points if open parking is envisaged. So I propose that condition 12 is extended to include this either or requirement, and the applicant can choose which is more appropriate for them. And I'll invite Kate to comment on that in the moment. Secondly, with reference to the residential amenity, officers identify that the construction of building B would involve the removal of hedging, the impact of which can be mitigated by a proposal to plant a new hedge. But that's not specifically addressed in condition 15, which covers landscaping in a general way. So I suggest we might want to consider including this specific aspect either as an addition to condition 15 or possibly as an additional condition so that the existing levels of privacy are protected. So perhaps Kate would care to comment on these 2 points. But beyond that, I plan to listen with interest to the views of colleagues, but it is hard to identify good planning reasons to go against the officer recommendation to approve. Thank you, Chairman.
Kate.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair and Councillor Seaborn. So in relation to the comments on those conditions, condition 12 in relation to electric vehicle charging points, I'm afraid I don't think we could really insist on all spaces being provided with a charging point. I think the reality would be that it would be likely that at least some of the parking would be allocated, and within those allocations there would be a responsibility on the developer through this condition to ensure that the different units did have access to a space which had a charging point. And in relation to the landscaping condition, condition 15, this doesn't specifically refer to specific areas of replacement hedging, and as I perceive, your specific concern is in relation to the area to the west of the site between Hawthorns and the application property. So we could very easily add a clause into that condition to just cover off that needed to be submitted with the application, so that when the details are submitted, it's very clear that that's necessary.
On the first point about charging points being or the allocation of parking spaces, can we add a word on that as well, just to say that an allocation system should be included?
Yes, certainly we can do that, because and then it would ensure that each unit would have access. Yes. Okay. Sorry, also, Chair, if I might add in further response to Councillor Townsend's comments earlier, I'm afraid I have to point out an error in my presentation. As Councillor Townsend pointed out, I'm afraid the elevations are so substantially similar between the previous appeal scheme and the current one that I have included the wrong ones within my presentation. So in that respect, in terms of the elevations, they're now proposing a more a form which is more appropriate within the surrounding area, in my view, with flat roofed to the porch and to the bay windows. And the best place for you to view those plans would be within the officer's report on page 15. So the current proposal before you, which is included within the drawing schedule, is the proposed buildings to the left-hand side of the page there, as I said, with the flat roofs, porches and bays to match.
Kate, you're frozen up for a moment. I'm not sure whether we're hearing you, but okay, we'll take it. We'll see whether Kate comes back. We'll take for the moment. Let's carry on with the next item. Unfortunately, Kate, we need Kate to. Okay. We'll stand by for a second to see if Kate is going to return. Zach, while we're waiting.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it was just in respect of the condition 12 on the fast charging sockets for electric vehicles, and I think it's a very valid point. Just to point out that the actual condition, although it's hidden in there, actually requires the submission of a scheme for those electric sockets before they're implemented. So we could add an informative, if members were minded, to say that we would like provision in accordance with Councillor Seaborn's recommendations. In terms of the landscaping scheme, I think Kate's covered that off. We can certainly require that within the first available planting season, following completion of development, that the hedgerows be replaced with suitable species, and require the details to be submitted as per the current condition. But we can buff that. We can make that condition more specific in that regard. Absolutely.
Okay. In fact, Kate has vanished, unfortunately, from our screens, so I fear we'll have to wait for a second for her to return. I think otherwise we won't get the answers to our questions.
What was the other question, if I may be able to help?
Well, I don't know. I think I believe, Councillor Seaborn, that your questions have been answered or addressed at least. But I was going on to another councillor to speak when Kate wasn't here to answer the questions. It seemed a bit
understood. Thank you, Chair.
So could we just stand by for a second to see if she returns? I did fear this would happen because her link did seem a bit lumpy. Kimberly, I don't think we do much else but wait, can we? I don't think there's a...
No, not really, Chairman.
Yeah.
Chairman, if I may, if it goes on much longer, obviously myself and Kat Pearson are on the call, and we'll certainly try to answer any further questions that members may have, if that's acceptable. But I just wanted to offer that as an alternative.
Yeah, we'll
should it go on much longer?
Yeah, indeed. We'll give her another minute. If it doesn't come back, then we'll proceed on that basis.
Okay, thank you. I think it's just the internet connection that she's having issues with.
Mm.
She's going to try and join us by phone because she's having problems with her computer.
Okay. Okay, I suggest we'll take next speaker, and if there's a question that can only be answered by Kate, we'll have to hold it back until she comes back. So, Councillor Dinas.
Thank you very much. A lot of my points have been raised already, but just 4 very small points. Can we just turn to the location plan, please, Kimberly?
Sorry, I'm having trouble trying to get my mouse to go to the back.
We could all just go to page 7 of our papers.
problem is I actually want to discuss the actual sizes. And my question is, Chair, and just where the reason why that would be appropriate. If you look at the location plans, you look at where the buildings are going to be. So that's probably better on page 8. Take out building A and building B, take out all the car parking space and turning spaces. It appears to give quite a small amenity area and the north of the plot. And my question was, how big is this amenity space? Because we've gone from 1 premises to 8 premises. And from my papers, it is very difficult to actually work out what that space is.
Chairman, if I may, it's the intention is that it would be a large communal area to the northwest as you look at that plan. Where you have sort of almost like a triangle point on the screen, where the northern boundary and the western boundary join. There's a large communal garden. Because it's flats rather than individual houses, there would be a shared garden for residents. I would personally say it's quite generous given some of the shared spaces I've seen for other flat blocks, but I appreciate that's a matter for members to decide rather than me as the decision maker.
Okay, well, I think it's quite tight for 8 families, but there we go. Let me just turn them back to my other points, if I may, Chair. It's been raised about the tree roots and the possible damage. Obviously, that is a bit of a concern. But if I can just turn to the internal space, which is page 19, fully accepting that the space standard is 1 metre only less on 2 premises. But the problem you have is, so if 60 is suitable against the standard 61, then we'll be soon saying, well, 59 is, or 58 is, or, you know, standards are standards, and they either pass or fail, and 2 have, which is 25%. You know, why can't developers, you know, when it's that close, just amend their plans slightly to actually meet the standard? It's just so heartbreaking that they just cannot be bothered for a relatively small space. Can the officers confirm, it says it meets the technical standards, does that also mean it meets the technical bedroom standards? Because most reports normally say both the technical standards have been met and the bedroom sizes have been met as well. And unless I've missed it, I couldn't find it. All fairly minor points. I am a little bit concerned about the bulk size and mass, you know, how it is slightly overbearing, which is what Councillor Ellis said. I do have a concern with that, but I'll be just grateful for the view on the bedroom sizes, the tree roots in particular. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dina. So I'll come back there directly, and apologies, my sincere apologies, everyone, for my internet blip there. In relation to the tree roots, the submitted arboricultural impact assessment includes details of a proposed area of slab foundation for the small part of building A, which would be near or within the root protection area of the oak to the rear, and it's proposed that building out in accordance with that detail within the ARB assessment is secured by condition. In relation to the bedroom sizes, yes, it has been checked against those and it does comply with those. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there's a message from Catherine Pearson to say what the area size is. So I'm grateful for that calculation.
Kate, can I suggest you turn your video off? I found that the video does suck a lot of internet speed. So if we know you're there, so we can hear you. So we don't need to necessarily see you. That's thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies again.
That's right. It's can't help. Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, I've got 4 points to make. The first one is climate change. I don't see any attempt to provide mitigation or adaptation features such as required by CC1 and CC2. Indeed, there are quite a few rooms, mostly bathrooms, which appear to have no windows at all, which obviously would require you to have the lights on, and you also have to have some sort of extractor fan. So that would be using energy when you could have windows. So and there's even very, very small windows in some of the living rooms. There's one living room, I think it's in, I can't remember which building it is now, building A. They're very small, and you think they'll probably have to have the lights on all the time. So that's a climate change issue. It's also not very pleasant for people who have to live there, I would have thought. So it seems to me they're trying to cram too many flats into the building, and that's a fundamental problem with it. The second issue was bats. We've covered bats, but it's very clear from the bat report and also from the Surrey Wildlife Trust report that they are saying that at least 2 bat tubes should be on the side of the building, and this should be a condition, and it isn't a condition. So it's got to be a condition. Otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, it's completely unacceptable. I'm really surprised that isn't a condition, because it's black and white. It's really clear. Okay, both of them recommended that. We also have, there's no indication on the elevations of there being bat boxes. There's also concern about biodiversity in general. Surrey Wildlife Trust gave quite a few recommendations for things like swift boxes, bat roosting features in the garden, wildlife-friendly soft landscaping, gaps in the boundary fences, all of these things which are required for biodiversity net gain. And again, we don't have any conditions about that. They're hardly mentioned. So in fact, they're not mentioned. So that's very disappointing, to say the least. And I agree with councillors Dinas and Ellis that it's overdevelopment. I think it's squeezing 8, that's possibly 16 to 24 people into what was formerly one building, that there's more room for cars than there is for amenity. I mean, what does that say? What sort of messages is that giving? We think it's acceptable to have more room for parking and for people to be able to use for their amenity, leisure, and getting a bit of fresh air. Extraordinary. So I'm very disappointed because I think it's not a very good development. And I'm inclined to thank you.
Thank you. I think on the bat point, we've already agreed that we'll come back and phrase a condition when we get towards the end of this. So we can pick up the points there about the back tubes and back boxes, I believe. Kath, I see you've got your hand up. Something you want to say? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to pick up some points. I did read everything really thoroughly, and I did discover that on one of the elevations, Councillor Darcy, I did see bat boxes. And I see Councillor Townsend nodding. So I'm picking up some points that have already been made. So there are bat boxes in the pictures on the elevations, in the elevations and the drawings. But another point I want to say is that someone mentioned that there were no flats within a mile. Now, there are many flats at Killocks, which is within about 100 metres. There are flats at Pavilion Court, one end of Cranley High Street, and Swallowhurst new development near where I live. There are flats, but we haven't flats of this particular type in Cranley East. Someone mentioned the bins. Having read the papers very thoroughly, I believe that the papers tell us that the bins have by law to be within a certain walking distance, don't they, Councillor Townsend, from the highway? And that's why they've been positioned where they have, I understand. Councillor Seaborn mentioned the density But if you actually know the area, because it's my ward and it's where I live, there are two huge houses on the opposite side of the road with a lot of land, equal to the size of, or perhaps a little bit bigger than the land on Fairhaven. And I disagree with the point made about, I'm afraid Councillor follows, that there are not, there isn't as much amenity space, because it's at least the size of where the cars are positioned on the plan. Talking about now trees, there's a good tree mitigation outline in the planning application, and all the trees that are significant, I think there are two. One is the oak, which is just outside the development in Nuthurst Avenue itself. That is going to be protected, it says. I want to make more points about the whole and the overall application in itself. We are here to look at the policies and apply those policies, and we are concerned for all the residents and have to think about nothing but this planning application. So I do take on board, and I have read all the papers that have been sent in, mostly from people in the actual Nuthurst Avenue itself. Unfortunately, we are not entitled to views, and a view of the car park is unfortunate, but you know, there are other places in Cranley where that is a possibility and is in reality. In fact, I'm thinking of St Nicholas Avenue, where there's a school and a Catholic church, and there's a car park there that is overlooked by other residents. So I don't think that is a point that can be considered, really. I've got points to make. I've made some notes here about the trees. There are no TPOs on any of the trees. One acacia tree is going to be pruned a little, and the overhanging branches of the oak tree, I believe, are going to be cut a little bit back too. As for access onto the highway, they're going to be splays, if you understand that. I had to ask about it, so that there is much more visibility to get out onto the highway. The footpath, I'm very interested in maps, and if you look on, I don't think you can at the moment, but if you do look on the Surrey maps, the footpath itself coming out, footpath 367, comes out before the first building on the location plan that's within the curtilage of Fairhaven, and then crosses over to the house called Thorndon, and then proceeds along that boundary onto the pavement, and then turns left and gives access to the zebra crossing, which then goes into Woodland Avenue and passes the two large houses, which are larger but fit in well with, I think, the design of the houses that will look as one house anyway on the actual site.
Catherine, can you bring your remarks to a conclusion, please?
I think Councillor Dean has said about the bulk of the properties. Now, the height of the properties that are proposed do not reach a larger height than the existing house there. So, you know, I think, and having set it back, that one property that's nearest the road, that is acceptable in my point of view. I want to make one more point.
Make it short, please, Councillor Reid.
Yeah. I think highways are satisfied. The bats issue has been sort of looked at and satisfied. protection of various other things have been satisfied, I don't really think that we can object, and I shall certainly not be objecting. I think it meets all the criteria.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there was a point that Councillor Dinas made about amenity space, and I do think they have quite a fair amount of it on here, but I think it does also emphasise another point that he made, that it is extremely difficult to understand why, with that amount of amenity space, they've chosen not to meet the space standard. So that is a little bit disappointing. In terms of highways, disappointing again that once again it's a bit of a tick box exercise from highways that effectively prevents us from actually having a discussion or weighing in meaningfully on that subject matter, which from my looking at it, there would be some scope to do that had highways given us any scope to do that whatsoever. But once again, they haven't raised any comments whatsoever, as far as I can see, either positive or negative, which of course is deemed to be sufficient. Which I'm never a huge fan of. It'd be good if we could actually engage with some of these things meaningfully. I think we've done the bats slightly to death, metaphorically. Sorry, Liz. But I think it's pretty clear where they can go at this point, and it looks, I do agree it needs to be guaranteed by condition though, as Councillor Darcy said. But moving on to the final point, I would be very interested at some point to see what happens if we push CC1 and CC2 as reasons for refusal. I say that partly out of curiosity, but also because this is one of several applications that have come before us recently where a reasonable interpretation of pushing CC1 and CC2 regarding the sustainability of the design, there are a number of aspects on that I think we could stick our colours to if we wanted to push it. And I would just like to ask officers as a general point, how confident that they feel objections based on CC1 and CC2, which I do consider to be slightly anemic policies in LPP1, how much weight would a planning inspector put on that were we to object based on CC1 and CC2? Thank you, Chair.
Zach,
do you want to answer that particular $64,000 question? Yes.
Well, I mean, it's very difficult for me to answer with any sort of real certainty, and I take all the points that Councillor Darcy mentioned, and we've had some exchange of correspondence since the last meeting, and I have agreed that that development management would meet with him and others to sort of talk about how we can perhaps make better use of the existing policies, which are adopted policies of the development plan, of course, and so carry full weight. In terms of where it would come in terms of a determination, obviously it would have to be weighed into the balance with all of the other factors, such as the net gain in housing, all of the other policy issues, and I would fear, and at the risk of being criticised, I would fear that our strategic policies perhaps don't give us enough room to refuse purely on those grounds. So my gut feeling was that we'd be very difficult to defend and appeal purely on the basis that the airtightness of the building isn't right, or that it hasn't provided the right orientation of building. Having said that, if there are conditions that members wanted to add that they felt were reasonable to this development, for instance, requiring I don't know, for instance, whether or not there's a requirement for permeable or porous surfaces within the garden. Obviously, there is a large area of parking. I would personally say that requiring that to be either permeable or porous would be a reasonable condition to avoid surface runoff. That's one example. And obviously, we do have the conditions around electric vehicle charging. I think we've got the 110 litres water per day, and I've just seen a message from Councillor Darcy, although I think a point of order probably should be made as a response to me. But what I was going to say was that we do have these policies, but policies in themselves have to be looked at in the context of the whole of the development plan and all of our policies, and so you can't. It's very difficult to just pick out one policy, and it's very rare that you will refuse on one policy alone. You would have to look at the development in its full context. And I just don't think we have the weight that would justify refusing. But that's a matter for you as members, not a matter for me or the decision maker.
But outside the environment of this particular application, it sounds like this is something that we should take this on board in terms of I don't know, working party or something. Because
absolutely.
Because it will keep this particular council. It'll keep coming up, and we better have an answer to it.
Chair, may I briefly respond to Zach in I hope, a constructive way?
Briefly, please, yes.
Well, firstly, thank you for being honest about that and not sugarcoating that fact, because I think we needed to hear that in order to take some more direct action on this subject. I personally would like to see in officers' reports a brief explanation of how an application actually meets CC1 and CC2, rather than us have to cobble together reasons why it might do or not. So it's more clear, and I will very much support the creation of a working group of Environment ONS to look at this specifically. So thank you, Zach.
Councillor Els.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a fairly minor point. I noticed condition 3 accords with the Highways recommendations in asking for new sight lines, new sight splays to the end, but the red line on the block plan and on the location plan doesn't include that area. And I'm just wondering how we can impose a condition on land that isn't part of the site that we're considering. The same could be said, at the front off of Ewhurst Road, they show a new pedestrian access, but it starts outside of their site. And I'm just wondering how, in fact, we can police these things. I would expect the red line to go around the area where these new splays are going to be, but it's certainly not shown as that on the block plan. I'd appreciate officers' comments. Thank you.
Kate, are you there? Yes.
Yes, I am. Yes, so thank you very much, Councillor Els. So in terms of this application, as I read the location plan, the visibility displays would be adjacent to the application, would be within the application site, i.e. that the applicant owns the land to either side of the proposed access. So the condition really is about having a very low boundary treatment either side of the access.
Can I come in, Chairman? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chairman. Can I just come in? Because I think the point's well made, but and normally, obviously, conditions relate to land within the applicant's ownership. But in this instance, the remaining land that would be providing the visibility display, we understand is highways land. So there are rights to protect that through agreements with the Highways Authority. It's not as though in this instance you've got a neighbouring property that already blocks those visibility displays. Those visibility displays would be over highway public land, so there's no issue there in that being provided. I mean, it's a requirement that they be retained by Highways, so it would be an anomaly if the Highway Authority then came and blocked off those visibility displays. So it is covered either within the land ownership of the applicant or within the public highway. So it shouldn't be an issue, and unless Lewis disagrees, and perhaps you could just confirm that, Lewis.
Thanks, Zach. No, I don't disagree. So long as the land is in the control of the applicant, or in this case, the Highways Authority, I don't see that there's an issue here in terms of the condition being an enforceable one.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Chairman, if I could just come back, the report does talk about Nuthurst Avenue with them having no legal right of access over it. So I would take from that as a private road and not highways. If it's highways land, then the site has access over it. But all the letters, the 38 letters of complaint, a lot of them made of objection. A lot of them made the point that it was a private road and they couldn't drive over it.
That's a fair point. Sorry, I hadn't picked up on the fact it was a private road, Councillor Ross.
Lewis, can you comment, or someone? It sounds to me, in the end, the legal matter which we've agreed is not part of the jurisdiction of this committee, but it still has to be satisfied that the applicant, as I understand it, the applicant has to find a way to meet that requirement, to meet that condition, and that's not our business, but they have to do it. Is that the correct statement, Lewis?
the condition has to fulfil a certain number of tests in order to be a lawful condition. So it has to be enforceable, it has to be achievable, for instance. So there are certain criteria that a condition has to meet in order for it to be a lawful one. Now, if we're talking about land outside of the application side, then the land should really be, as I've said, either in the control of the applicant or, sorry, County Highways Authority, if we're talking about visibility displays. I don't have, obviously, land ownership information in front of me, so I can't provide you with precise information in that regard. But that's essentially the thrust of it.
Okay, but can you advise us that the condition as stated is a lawful condition as it stands today, as we sit here this evening? If
you could just bear with me, Chairman, I'm just going to have a quick read of it.
Okay,
and if
we'll move on and come back to you later. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've had some very helpful comments concerning conditions and improving the conditions. It seems to me, though, getting back to the basics, that we had an appeal in 2000 of the application in 2018. The only ground for refusal then was the bats. Since then, we've got conditions to sort out the bats. We've got an improved elevation of the building, which I personally think is an improvement on the 2018 elevations. The inspector, who after all, when you deal with an appeal, looks at the application de novo, didn't come up with any other reasons why there should be a refusal apart from the bat problem, and therefore I cannot see how I can do anything but support the officer's recommendation to approve this with the conditions that Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Townsend have highlighted for improvement. Thank you.
I've got several hands coming up for a second time here. I need to, unless things are new conditions, which, and yes, Councillor Egan, I know you haven't spoken yet. I can come to you in a moment. Which are new conditions or new issues that could cause this to be refused, then please don't go over old ground. But Councillor Egan, you have not spoken, so I'm coming to you next.
Thank you, Chairman. My point is on the inspector's report and the importance we're attaching to him not having commented on anything other than the bats. What he actually says is because he was minded to dismiss the appeal because of the bats, he didn't consider any other planning matters, and therefore I don't think we need to be bound by too much concern on that aspect, and that if there are good planning reasons to reject this, then I think we should be allowed to look at them. And I feel that the points that are being made about safety and the amenity of the residents and other users of that land should give rise to a sufficient planning consideration to put alongside the sustainability arguments. But I just feel we've gone too far down the line of worrying about there was only one reason to reject it last time.
Officers can comment, but the problem, as I understand it, is that it's the second time we've seen this, and it's very hard to add points that could have been raised the first time. If we thought they were
I think the first application was dealt with under delegated powers, Chairman. Sorry for interrupting there.
Yes.
But I don't think it's been to members before. Yeah.
But the same applies, doesn't it? I mean, we in terms of adding new points which were not used as reasons for refusal first time around. Can you comment on that, Zach?
Well, I mean, the appeal decision is added in, is included in the pack that was sent out today, the late sheet. So a copy of the appeal decision is there. The inspector did concentrate very much on the bat reasons and said something like, because I've agree with the substantive point, I've not really looked at the other matters. So in theory, they could be. But you would have thought that if the inspector had an issue with any of those points, either layout, principle, highway safety, etc., they would have been duty bound, as the councillor just said, to consider those, because they're actually determining a full application. They're not just looking at the council's reasons for refusal.
Kate, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to sort of come back in relation to the issue around the visibility displays and Councillor Else's question. In relation to the previous application, which, as I said in the report, was very substantially similar in relation to layout, that application was accompanied by a drawn plan showing the details, which unfortunately isn't submitted with this application. But notwithstanding that, I think that previous plan on the previous application satisfied the highways officers that they could be achieved. So I have been looking at that plan on the previous application, 2018 1418. And in effect, that shows the visibility displays indicated on the plan, and they are either within the carriageway of the private road, which is obviously an area where which is going to be kept free of obstruction, or within the hedgerows, which are already quite low level, but the hedgerows which surround the application site. So they're not specifically within land which is associated with a neighbouring property. So in light of that, I think it would be possible. It would be likely to be possible for the developer to abide by that condition. But notwithstanding that, in light of Councillor Else's comments, I think the condition as worded currently could be strengthened by making it what we call negatively worded, to make it into a Grampian condition. So we could potentially amend the wording of that condition to say, no dwelling hereby consented shall be occupied until, rather than the prior to first occupation as it stands. That would just strengthen the clarity that off-site measures were required for the development to be implemented. And
yes, that makes.
Okay, I think we're down to the last speaker. Councillor Reid, you've spoken before, but can you make your point quickly, please?
One of the points that I wanted to pick up on was Mr. Kidd, and he was suggesting that hundreds of people, children, women and men, use that actual footpath. I would suggest it's more like tens of people, not hundreds. It's a footpath that goes right through the village and past the C of E school, primary school. and as I pointed out before, the footpath does not go past the entrance and the exit of this application that's been put in for the redevelopment of Fairhaven.
Okay, thank you. Kate, your hand's still up. I presume that Councillor Townsend, your hand's going up and down. Do you want?
Apologies, Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything because I thought Lewis was going to come back and advise us.
Well, I was going to go back to Lewis in a second. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Lewis, you were looking something up. Lewis, are you there?
Yes, sorry, Chairman. Yes, I have been just having a look into it. I certainly agree with Kate that at the very least, there should be what we call a Grampian style condition. So that means that the condition is worded in a way that prevents any development taking place without the condition first having been complied with. So to that extent, we overcome the issue of whether or not the land necessary for displays is in the ownership of the applicant, because if they are unable to get consent from the landowner, whoever that may be, then they can't implement the planning permission lawfully, and we could then take enforcement action against any implementation under those circumstances. I have to say that there is I mean, I'm personally satisfied that such a condition would be a lawful one. There are small risks associated with imposing conditions where it relates to land outside of an applicant's control in terms of reasonableness and their ability to comply with that condition. But I think under the circumstances, we have a very strong justification to impose this condition in terms of highway safety. So I'm quite satisfied about the lawfulness of the condition in that respect. So, sorry, to wrap things up, I think we can proceed so long as the condition is worded negatively, i.e. in a Grampian style condition.
Right, thank you. Okay, I think now question, I suppose, is it to Kimberly? Do we want to go establish these new conditions and informatives before we get to the recommendation, so that they're all available in one go, or do we vote on the recommendation and then discuss or agree the further conditions? Can I have your advice as to which way to do it?
I would suggest you confirm the conditions themselves, because it's either an approval or a refusal, and if it's the approval, you want to include the extra conditions in that. Right,
so let's go through notes then and see what the conditions were. So if I recall, on bats it was that, well, can someone advise me as to what the proposed condition or amendment is to do with bats? Councillor Townsend, yeah.
Yes, so the condition was to be on the in line with the recommendation in the BAT report to carry out the full mitigation within that report, which is also referred to in the Surrey Wildlife Trust report, to implement the bat tubes and bat boxes on site.
I don't know if it would be helpful, Chair, but I can take you through my schedule of amendments as we've been going along.
Yep, yes.
I would agree with Councillor Townsend that would be suitable wording. So I would suggest that prior to the first occupation of the dwellings hereby approved, all mitigation measures identified within the preliminary ecological appraisal and bat scoping assessment dated 12th December 2018 shall be carried out in full and thereafter maintained to the satisfaction of the local planning authority. In relation to the condition for lighting, which I believe is condition, where are we? Sorry, bear with me 1 minute. So this is recommended condition 10, and that's requiring details to be submitted. At the end of the first sentence there, we could just insert an additional clause to say the following, that all lighting shall be provided, sorry, bear with me, I'm just finding the relevant part of my notes here in relation. Here we go. All lighting shall be provided in accordance with the Bats and Lighting in the UK, Bats and the Built Environment series document. In relation to the environmental protection licence, there's quite a specific wording recommended in relation to that in the Surrey Wildlife Trust comments, which allows different options. So I can take that directly from the letter as an informative, as it's not binding upon us. And in relation to refuse storage, I don't believe that the committee reached a direct resolution as to whether you felt additional or altered conditions were required in that regard. So I will.
We did, Chairman.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Chairman. Zach advised that we could put a condition in that the applicant submit plans for the bin storage.
Yep, that was said. Yeah.
So I would say, Chair, if you want a direct wording for that, I would say prior to the first occupation of any dwelling hereby consented, the applicant shall provide suitable refuse and recycling storage in accordance with a scheme which has previously been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority.
Okay.
And then I think the final condition, which an amended wording was proposed for, is in relation to condition 3, which is around the provision of the visibility space. I think in light of Lewis's comments, it would be appropriate to amend that to be provided prior to commencement of development. So I would say, other than for the provision of the access, no development shall commence until the existing visibility displays, the existing vehicular access onto Knothurst Avenue has been provided with the specified visibility displays in accordance with plans which have previously been submitted to and approved in writing by the LPA. So that's in effect just altering the first part of that condition. And that's everything from me, so I'll let the other officers comment. Thanks.
Sorry, Chairman, and shall thereafter be retained free of obstruction to visibility above X metres as set out by highways. So it's protecting the visibility space going forward.
Councillor Townsend.
Councillor Seaborn also added, there was a section to add in about the hedge, and that Kate said that she would add in, and also there was an informative regarding the EV charging as well that we said that we would add. And finally, Zach said about putting in about the permeable drive area.
I think that's a proposal. Certainly, I didn't hear it agreed or proposed by member to do that. It was
I'd like to propose it then.
Well, thank you. Yes. Councillor Darcy, your hand is up. Is it something to do with one of the conditions?
Yes, the condition regarding the bats, that the report I quoted from, the bat report, is dated the 21st of June 2019. I don't know whether that is exactly the same set of recommendations as in the earlier one, which Kate mentioned, or whether these are additional, but they need to be also taken into account.
Okay.
Because this is the one that followed on from the actual survey.
Okay. So say again the date, Councillor Darcy.
21st of June 2019.
Thank you.
If I could just say, Chair, as I saw it, it was the older document. But if you're satisfied to, we can leave the exact. If you're happy to delegate to officers the exact reference of the iteration of the document, we can confirm that after the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. We'll just move to the to the vote then. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 17.
Sorry, Chairman. Sorry, can I just say I did propose the permeable paving, so which wasn't carried forward. So I don't know whether I've got a seconder for that.
I'm willing to second, Chair.
Yes, thank you. I had to put it on my list, but so I know I was going to say it. I'm going to read it out. So I'll say it again. So subject to conditions 1 to 17, informatives 1 to 14, and the conditions we just discussed on bats, lighting, environmental protection license, refuse arrangements, the visibility displays, the hedge, the EVT, is that right? Charging point allocation, and a permeable driveway. That permission be granted. So Kimberly, can you start the voting, please? I assume that all councillors are able to vote unless they indicate very strongly.
I've got one person who hasn't. I can't tell who, but I've only had 14 votes so far, and there should be 15 as far as I'm aware. I don't know if there's anyone who isn't able to.
Does everyone believe they voted or can't vote?
That's it. I've got 15 now, so I'll end the polling and show the results.
Okay, so that's carried.
So that's, yeah.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on. So we're moving on now to item 8.3, landed outbuilding at Bedford Farmhouse, Bedford Lane, Thursley. And Tracy, do you wish to present, please? I'm sorry, just check. Sorry, there's no. Yes, there's a speaker. Yep, carry on, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can everybody see the presentation?
It's not full screen yet, if you want to put on full screen.
It's the wrong presentation. That item was deferred, sorry.
Isn't the same file? Okay.
Yep.
No, that's still the wrong one, I'm afraid. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Gib.
Okay, the application proposes the conversion of an ancillary outbuilding to form an independent dwelling, together with the change of use of the land to a residential garden, creation of an access road, and associated works. On this plan, you can see that the outbuilding converted to a dwelling is here. This would be the access driveway. This is an existing access, vehicular access from Bedford Lane. The application site is located on the north side of Bedford Lane, and Bedford Farmhouse is a two-storey Grade 2 listed building. The detached outbuilding is located approximately 90 metres to the north-northeast of the main dwelling house. As you can see, there are minimal changes to the envelope of the building. Only minor changes are proposed to the fenestration. The photographs of the site show how rural the area is. And that's the outbuilding as existing. The key matters for consideration: the impact on the greenbelt and an isolated dwelling in an unsustainable location. However, I'd like to draw members' attention to an update sheet which was proposed, a differing proposed block plan that then is included within the agenda report, as two existing block plans were submitted in that report. Additionally, there's a verbal update. There is an amended recommendation. The recommendation is for refusal. However, the reason for refusal would only be based on reason 1 and not reason 2. Therefore, the impact on the greenbelt is not a matter for consideration. I'm done, Councillor, Chairman. You're muted.
Don't mute myself. It seems to be the okay. Right, we have. Thank you for the presentation. So we have one speaker in support, Tara Everson from Planet Consulting. Yeah, so you got 4 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you and good evening, councillors. As Tracy has said, our client is seeking permission to convert an ancillary outbuilding into a separate residential unit. We're pleased to see that officers agree that the proposed conversion is acceptable in that the size of the dwelling meets minimum space standards, the driveway will have an acceptable impact on character, There will be no impact on the listed building, and the scheme will have an acceptable impact on the landscape, trees, the local highway network and protected species. So the only issue is, well, the principle of development within the green belt. Whilst the application has been recommended for refusal on this ground, we believe that the application is an acceptable form of development within the green belt and that the conversion of the building would accord with the local plan. We agree with your officers that the building is in an isolated location within the countryside where the creation of a new dwelling is normally resisted. However, both government and local policy list several specific exceptions. And one of these exceptions is where the development would reuse a redundant building and enhance its immediate setting. The application building is redundant. Its position away from the main house means that the applicants are finding it more and more difficult to use. Planning policy therefore allows for this redundant building to be reused as a new dwelling, provided there is an enhancement to the building setting. The proposed wildflower meadow has been referred to in your officer's report. However, this is just one of the enhancements that has been proposed. Following recommendations from the applicant's ecologist, a new native hedgerow will be planted along the entire western boundary of the application site. And that's shown on the updated block plan that's been reproduced in your update sheets. So this new hedgerow in itself represents a significant enhancement to the site as it's over 100 metres in length. In addition, native plants and bulbs will be planted at the base of this new hedgerow to attract bees and butterflies. Bat boxes and tubes and bird boxes will be provided on the row of trees along the eastern boundary of the site, and additional trees will be planted within this row where there are existing gaps. These measures will not only enhance the visual appearance of the site, but also enhance biodiversity. And for these reasons, we believe that the scheme accords entirely with Greenbelt policy. Your officers have concluded that the new dwelling is unacceptable in principle because it will be in an unsustainable location. However, both government and local plan policies allow for new dwellings in isolated locations, provided they meet one of the listed exceptions. In this case, the reuse of a redundant building. Isolated dwellings are by their very nature likely to be remote from other buildings. As such, they are also likely to be in less sustainable locations. But despite this, planning policy specifically allows for these isolated buildings to be converted. A recent barn conversion at Millhanger Barn was approved by officers in December 2018. This outbuilding is just over 1 kilometre away to the north of the application site. Officers in that case concluded that it was sustainably located. And we ask that for the sake of consistency in applying policy, we suggest that the application proposal is directly comparable and therefore also sustainably located. We ask councillors to take a similar stance to this Millhanger permission and view this proposal as a sustainably located reuse of a redundant building that will make a small but important contribution to the stock of smaller, more affordable residential dwellings in the borough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. This is in my ward, so thank you for letting me speak first. We've just recently, this evening, considered a site in Newhurst, which is knocking down one house and building 8 flats. Last meeting, we considered one in Farncombe, where we were knocking down a bungalow and building 5 houses. All we're told by the officers that they're needed to support the council's housing stock, and permission should be granted. This application comes from the opposite end of the spectrum. There's nothing to be demolished, there's nothing new to be built. There are no objections from neighbours, which there were in great force on the other 2. There's no objection from the parish council. The only comments are 5 letters in support from neighbours. Now, 5 may not seem very many, but probably that's the total number of properties in the immediate vicinity. But in this case, the officers have recommended that we refuse permission. The officer's report says that the benefits of providing a separate dwelling would not outweigh the adverse impacts, and that it is considered to be inappropriate development within the Greenbelt due to the harm identified. Now, having read through the report several times, which is a very thorough report, I have to admit, but I struggled to find the harm identified, really. There's no objections from any of our statutory consultees, no impact on visual amenity, no impact on residential amenity, on listed building or the trees or biodiversity, which only leaves the impact on the green belt. And we now understand that that's been removed as a reason for refusal. The building is already there. It's got brick cavity walls, it's got a tiled roof, it's got drainage, a water supply, electricity supply. It's a very small single-storey annex, which has been used for the last 30 years as ancillary residential accommodation to the Bedford farmhouse. It's been used in its time as a studio, as a games room, and as a cinema room, but is now no longer needed as ancillary accommodation. The officers have noted that the annex is remote and unsustainable, which more or less describes all the houses in that area between the A3 and the A286 Hazelmere Road. Indeed, many of us on this committee represent rural areas where houses are remote and unsustainable, but they manage perfectly well. The annex is about 90 metres distant from Bedford Farmhouse to the south, and the same to Hindhead Hill Farm to the north, which is less than the distance between other dwellings in the area. Bedford Farmhouse is more than double that distance from Holt Farm, to its nearest neighbour to the south, and from Bedford Farm to the north. I remain to be convinced of the harm or adverse impact that an existing building could cause by becoming a separate dwelling rather than ancillary residential accommodation. I, of course, look forward to my colleagues' comments with interest, but I'm currently struggling to agree with the officers. Thank you.
Councillor Cossell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm really quite relieved to have heard Councillor Else's comments, because they are pretty much identical to the things I wanted to say, and I thought I might just be on my own on this. I've never quite seen something like this in which none of the immediate neighbours seem to object. The parish council doesn't object. None of the consultees seem to object. We have a building that's not being used, with an application to provide what seems to be a quite sensible and appropriate housing. Of course, it's not sustainable in the sense that it's in a remote location, and everything, all my instincts tell me that if planning policies are seriously suggesting that in these circumstances we shouldn't grant permission, then I have more concern about the planning policies. In this case, although that's something I always try to adhere to and always put first in any consideration, I think in this particular case, I just can't find any serious reason to object to this proposal.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect I'm going to be one of the number of people who thought they were going to be on their own in voicing a particular view of opinion on this, but I don't think I'm going to be by the looks of it. The only issue I have with this, and it's really just an opinion of officers, we're told obviously that these things don't create precedent or don't open up areas to development, and I just want to get some assurance that if we were to allow this, it would not build up any kind of precedent for further development on untouched part of the Greenbelt, because I agree with Councillor Costa and Councillor Else that this is just replacing a building that's already there. It's not building on green field. It's just changing something that is already built. And as much as we shouldn't, I don't think, be building new houses in the Greenbelt as much as we can, I do concur with Councillor Else that if there are places like Elstead and Thursley and some of the other rural parts that are by default isolated and remote, and we wouldn't build anything anywhere like that if we were to take an absolutist approach on that. So I also think on the opposing side of this, any applicant who wishes to do this can easily make a building redundant, and that's the only thing I'd flag up on the other side. If they want to make it redundant, they can simply stop using it and claim it's redundant in order to activate that particular Greenbelt exemption. So I do have a few qualms on that side, but really my only issue is about whether this can ever be a gateway to other things that we might disapprove of. But otherwise, I can't see how we can oppose this for what it is directly. Thank you, Chair.
Zach, do you want to comment, please?
Well, I mean, I can't give that reassurance in that Miss Everson, who gave her presentation, actually used a previous application that was approved as a precedent to justify this application. But you know, clearly it's a matter for members to determine. I just want to explain, if I may, the reason why we're dropping refusal recommendation number 2, because I don't think that was necessarily quite clear. But we've established that in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework and our own policies, reuse of redundant buildings, provided they don't have a materially harmful impact on openness or greater impact on openness, can be appropriate development. And on that basis, there's no need to demonstrate very special circumstances. It's either appropriate or inappropriate in the Greenbelt. We've established that this is not inappropriate development within the Greenbelt. So the only reason for refusal is based on its isolated nature and unsustainable location. But I just wanted to be clear on that in terms of the recommendation that's before you, albeit I start to believe that might be a moot point, having heard the first 4 or 5 speakers in any case. Thank you.
Catherine, you've got your hand up. Do you want to make a point?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just in relation to Councillor Follow's point, just to follow on from what Zach said. If members are minded to grant permission against the officer recommendation, which from the discussion so far may well be an option, I would just like to remind members that they do need to give reasons for granting permission against the recommendation. So if a motion is put forward to go against the recommendation, I would just urge those members to think carefully and be articulate in the particular circumstances of this case as to why they think this application is policy compliant. And I think Councillor Follows, that offers you the best insurance that you can hope for in allowing this application, and for it to not be used as you know, as other applications have been this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that advice, Catherine.
And if I may there, Councillor Cole, and I'm not leading members in any way here, but the point that was made by the speaker, by Tara Everson, was that in the applicant's opinion and the agent's opinion, that this is not inappropriate, sorry, that this, although it is an isolated dwelling, they're saying it should be allowed as one of the exceptions under paragraph 79 of the NPPF, on the basis it would reuse redundant or disused buildings, which it ticks, and enhance its immediate setting. You'll see in the report, officers were of the opinion that it was a neutral impact in terms of setting, but members may take a contrary view in terms of that being the exception. Thank you.
I can, from when I was a borough council in the Midlands, I remember it's not a very similar application, but it was outside, it was in the countryside, and members made an exception, and immediately the application had been approved. They came back and they wanted to be bigger, because it then becomes a legal dwelling, and all the law that allows it to be bigger and expanded. Okay, there are restrictions, but they'll come back. Now, this won't stay like this if we approve it. Someone will buy it and they'll say, what can we do? We can make it bigger. Or replace it with something which is the same mass. So, you know, I think we should be aware that if we do make this exceptions, then we're everything else that can happen to a house in the countryside can happen. It won't stay the same. I think we have to. I would say, and for that reason, I don't think I can support it, because I think it just opens the door to expansion of this property, and then by precedent other properties. Anyway, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very conscious of the comments that have already been made. They reflect my concerns as well. We do have in the rural areas applications like this coming up. It's very much in the area I represent, where you've got a lot of conversion of redundant buildings. And we have to be careful not to create the precedents they've talked about. My concern on this one would certainly share your comments, Chairman, is what can we do if we do approve this? What can we do to restrict its growth? And I mean, I've seen a small piggery that's now been converted into a 4-bedroomed house. something called Little House is now 8 bedrooms and has got its swimming pool, etc. So in principle, I understand the reuse of this building. I understand the rural nature, but I would want some assurances from officers that we can at least try and limit the expansion once we've agreed this. Thank you.
Moment the recommendation is to refuse. So if that recommendation is not accepted, then we'll have to come back and come up with a motion to approve. So at that point, we can pick up your points. At the moment, the recommendation is to refuse, and so we're debating that point. But I accept your points entirely. But we can deal with that when we come to the next point.
If I could come back and said that I would be minded to accept the refusal, unless we could be satisfied on the other matters. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. When I first lived in Surrey, I lived in Elstead, and I've lived both in cities and in the countryside, and I am very familiar with these odd dwellings every now and again. And I must say that having lived in isolated properties, I chose to live there, and I chose to live quite a simple life, and some people want to do that. But I can understand in the refused reason 1, because it does go against policies that we have in our local plan, part 1, and so I would probably be minded to refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Higgin.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to hear the officer's comment about the point that Tara Everson made about being inconsistent with the previous decision I'm not familiar with. Have the officers got any basis on which to give a bit more clarity on that?
This was referred to as Millhanger Barn, I think. Does anyone?
I don't know the specifics of that case, I'm afraid.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
Each application on its own merits, so, is this the usual standard for planning?
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very much minded to go with the officer's recommendation for refusal, because I'm looking at the site and looking at the red line boundary, and obviously we've got the block plan sent through again on the update sheet, and it's a huge site, and there's an awful long road going to be going down to it. So it is completely isolated. It isn't anywhere really near the road. And if you look at this as not being isolated, then every single stable block that won't be used, the horses will be turfed out for a while, it will be unused, and you'll be finding that every single stable block will be actually being used for, to being put forward for development. I mean, this is a change of usage on this whole area. It's not just the little house that's sitting on the edge of a field. It is the whole of this piece of land that will then be bought into the curtilage of this property. So I cannot see it as anything else but completely isolated. And I do. We've been here before, and it's said about, oh, this hasn't set a precedent, but we know for a fact that it does. And if we do this, I can see in Dunsfold, in Cranley, stable blocks which I know haven't been used for a while, which are across the other side of fields, not really right near the road, being used as an unused building, which will then be converted. And I don't think that's what the planning is meant to be. And I really can't. I can't agree. Well, I do agree with the officer's recommendation for refusal, and I would urge my fellow members to really think the fact that we're looking for assurances to limit down this building size and to not allow more building on it, and to seek those assurances surely tells us that this is an isolated dwelling in the countryside and it shouldn't be approved. Thank you.
Councillor Darcy.
I was going to ask about sustainability, but I noticed that in the report it does define the assessment of sustainability, and having read that very carefully, it says that one of the issues is whether an isolated dwelling would be created. Well, clearly, although it's an existing building, it's not a dwelling, so you would be creating an isolated dwelling. And clearly it doesn't have suitable connectivity so as to prevent dependency on vehicular trips, which is obviously important with regard to whether it's isolated and also whether it's sustainable. So I would think that I would be tending to agree with the officers on this one, although on the face of it, it does seem a bit, it does seem a sensible thing to allow someone to convert an existing building. On the other hand, it is creating a dwelling where really we shouldn't want to have a dwelling for the reasons of accessibility and so on. And also there are the dangers that are outlined by Councillor Townsend and also by some of my other colleagues. So I am minded to support the officers in this one. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Dinas, last speaker.
Thank you, and I'll be very, very brief. Often in planning meetings, I criticise officers by saying, well, this is against our policies, yet you're recommending. So how can I, hand on heart, then say, well, actually this is against the policy, but it's okay on this occasion? I have to be consistent. I want us to follow policies. We have policies, we have a local plan, and therefore we have to stick to those policies. Sometimes even if we think it's a slightly bizarre decision, a policy is a policy. This is contrary to the policy, therefore I will be supporting the officers. Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman, I've been trying to talk for some time. If
I'm sorry, I wasn't keeping my eye on you. You've moved around. You were at the bottom right. Now you've moved up. So you. But Councillor Wilson.
I'll try and stay still. But I think
no. You can't control it. It's not you. Carry on, Councillor Wilson.
I too would be minded to support the officers because I think we'd be given permission for a building plot looking at the size of the land rather than an isolated dwelling. I know that is what the reason for refusal, but there are two good reasons for not allowing it. One is that I think people would use it as a precedent, and two, that if it wasn't used as a precedent, the people who live there are going to be very isolated. Around them are large properties, farms, and so on. This is normal for the countryside. Little isolated properties are going to grow, as my colleagues have said. So I'd be minded to refuse this and go with the officers.
Councillor Follows, you want to come back again on this?
Very quick question. Other than the fact that I completely agree with the comments that have been said about, and I think that the precedent it sets is one that I think is very real. Can I just double check with officers? This is definitely a conversion and not a regularization of a dwelling that is a de facto dwelling already, is it? Just to be clear.
Can someone comment on that? If I was aware, they've not claimed it's a dwelling. They've said it's a redundant building.
I know what the report said. I'm just checking.
Yeah. Upon a site visit, it does not appear that it is being used as a dwelling.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Right. So we'll go to the vote. So the motion is that the application be refused. So Kimberly, can you? So yes means.
Sorry, Chairman. Can you just make it clear that it's only the refusal reason one, because there was a verbal update?
Indeed. So yes.
I think that needs to be.
Yes, you're right. I should. So the amended change from the agenda is that it's only reason one for refusal, and so be clear on the vote. Yes is refuse. Okay, so that it has been refused. Thank you. Right, we move on to the final item. If I can find my papers. So item B1, land at Barclays site, Knoll Lane, Cranley. And Kate again.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Kimberly, if you could possibly bring up the presentation for me, it's at the very start of the presentation. And I'm leaving my video off, as you've indicated that may possibly have caused my earlier issue. So I hope that's
right.
okay, although I can put it back on.
We'll pray that's true. Yeah.
So this application, whilst we're getting the start of the slideshow, this application is for one phase of a multi-phase scheme, which already has outline consent within Cranley, which is bound by Alford Road, Knoll Lane and the High Street. They're proposing here within phase 2.2 the provision of 114 dwellings. And I'll just wait for the presentation so I can show you the next slide.
Fiona, can you see if you can get it up? I've frozen, I'm afraid.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. So I can now see the presentation and hope everyone else can as well.
Yep, we can see it.
If you could bring up, thank you very much. So here we can see a location plan for part of the development. This is shows the wider outline consent for, as you can see, a development of 4 phases. Phase 1, which you can see there to the right hand side of the screen, immediately adjoins Knoll Lane, and that phase of the development is now substantially complete and partially occupied. Phases 3 and 4, which you can see on the plan there, we don't yet have details for. Phase 2, which is the current application area, includes a number of separate phases within phase 2. Phase 2.1 has provided dwellings with in an area to the immediate left of the screen there, to the west of Knoll Wood. And the current application relates to the section of the site which forms the main bulk of phase 2. So here you can see the proposed site plan, which is a key consideration in relation to the reserve matters application. The access road route very much aligns with the outline consent, and as you can see, the 114 dwellings proposed are clustered around this central road network which has been created. The dwellings would be predominantly dwelling houses of 2 or 2.5 stories, although there would be some taller development, with the northernmost building you can see there to the north of the Nuthurst stream being a block of flats which would have 3 stories. And just to give you some details of the proposed scheme, the current reserve matters application is for the matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping. So the principle of the development of the site has very much been established for the wider outline consent for 424 units to be delivered across the wider site. The breakdown of the units proposed within the current phase 2.2 would be 12 1-bedroom, 37 2-bedroom, 48 3-bedroom and 17 4-bedroom. And of the 114 units proposed to be delivered, 48 of them would be affordable. Across the wider scheme overall, the applicant proposes to provide 30% of the development as affordable housing, and that's unaltered by this proposal. And finally, the scheme would provide 272 parking spaces, which would include visitor spaces adjacent to the road. Thank you. So here we can see some of the proposed elevations of the buildings. The image at the top to the right, you can see there is the block of flats, which I referred to in relation to the site plan, which is the northernmost built form. To the left-hand side of that, you can see a typical detached property with semi-detached and terrace properties, which would typify the built form of the proposed development to the bottom of the slide there. As you can see, the buildings have been designed to conform to the Surrey vernacular and include features such as the gables you can see and the hanging tiles. So sorry, if I could just go back to the previous slide. So here we can see some site photos, some of which were taken this morning by an officer who went out to the site. The top left-hand corner is looking across the site from the southern point next to Knoll Wood towards the former Hewitt's development, which you can just see the buildings within there. And the right-hand image is looking in a similar direction. And finally, the bottom image is looking towards phase 3 and 4 from just within the site bounds of phase 2.2. As you can see, they are currently undertaking works in relation to services. Thank you. And finally, to confirm, the officer recommendation is for approval. I would note that recommendation has been amended with changes to the scheme of conditions. You will have received the update sheet, so I can just take you through that and the amended scheme of conditions. Firstly, in the update sheet, just to state that I've recommended an additional informative be attached to the decision notice, which just clarifies that this nothing in relation to this reserved matters consent removes the developer's obligations to discharge the pre-commencement conditions of the original outline consent, which relate to prior to the commencement of each phase. And then following on from that, we received comments on my recommended condition, my recommended schedule of conditions from the developer, as we are obliged to do in accordance with the pre-commencement regulations, which require us to gain their permission for conditions which are recommended to be require the submission of details prior to the commencement of development. In light of those comments, a number of revisions to the schedule have been made. So this is a full updated schedule in order to avoid a complicated schedule of amendments. I've given the whole schedule here. So if there are any questions on that, we can deal with the specific questions as we go through. So that's the update sheet. Following on from the update sheet, I also need to give you a verbal update to state that an additional condition is recommended, which you don't have before you in writing. But it has come to light that a condition recommended by Thames Water wasn't included within that original schedule. So I've recommended a detailed wording which prevents occupation unless Thames Water in effect are satisfied that there would be sufficient water supply infrastructure to serve the development. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
You're muted again, Chair.
Sorry, I'll start again. Councillor Else. Can someone unmute Councillor Else? All right.
No, I've unmuted myself,
right,
Chairman. You're the one who has the problem with unmuting, not
yeah,
me.
so it seems. I was just, I can't remember.
I was just wondering, usually when these reserve matters applications come back to us, we like to see how the affordable housing is shared around the site. It's always been a Waverley thing to avoid having them all gathered together in one corner or having them look different to the market housing. And I just wondered if we could have a look at the block plan and be told whereabouts the affordable houses are going to be. Thank you.
Yes. Oh. Sorry, I don't know if everyone can hear me now, but thank you very much for the question, Councillor Else. Unfortunately, because the scheme was amended during the course of consideration, we don't have an application which very clearly enables you to visualise where the affordable housing would go, but I can direct you to the relevant places within the plan. So looking at the section of the site to the north of Nuthurst Stream, which, as you can see, dissects the site in a northeasterly, southwesterly direction. The northernmost building you can see here on the site plan is flats, which would be provided as affordable housing. I believe the buildings to the immediate left of that and the buildings to the immediate south of that, this cluster of 3 buildings here, would be provided as affordable housing. And in addition to that, within the southern part of this phase, so to the opposite side of Nuthurst Stream, if you look at the central spine road here where the arrow is, some units, so the central units to the west of that spine road, and the more southern units to the east of that spine road would be provided as affordable housing. So in officer view, the affordable housing would be spread sufficiently throughout the development and sufficiently mixed with the proposed private accommodation.
May I come back, Chairman?
Please do, yeah.
I would have to disagree. I think this goes against everything that we've been battling against for the last 5, 6, 7 years. There seems to be a conglomeration of affordables up in the top right-hand corner, and then they're down the spine road. I couldn't agree that they were scattered around the site, and I'm going to have great difficulty in agreeing with this recommendation. Sorry.
Can I ask before Councillor Townsend, a related question? In the report, it says that the mix of, and I mean just the numbers of affordable housing, is not necessarily in accordance with the specified, I guess, the overall mix, but you're satisfied that that can be corrected later.
Yes.
Is there any danger? Is there any danger of, you know, is the next time the last time this will be corrected? Because otherwise you could end up with an impossible situation at the end. You know, something which they can say is impossible to achieve. You are satisfied that we're closing out. We're satisfied that we're not closing out achieving the final mix between affordable and non-affordable.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you for the question. I am satisfied with that. The applicant has provided an amended schedule of affordable housing to be provided across the whole site. So they have in effect given us details through the deed of variation, which has previously been agreed on this application. They've given us details of how they're going to vary that mix. So we're still satisfied that overall the correct affordable mix will be provided. And, you know, I'd say probably the bulk of the development is still yet to come before us within phases 3 and 4.
Indeed, yeah.
In relation to the issue of affordable housing as well, and Councillor Else's comments, obviously you'll want to discuss them as a committee, but I just sort of thought I'd reiterate that I understand from our affordable housing team that the developer is currently working with an RP and have, in essence, provided units which that RP can support, and I would expect that the RP has had an involvement within the detailed design of those units. So I just wanted to add that for clarity, and also to say that in general, this site aside, in general, we wouldn't generally expect an RP to support a very scattered form of affordable housing within a site because of the various operational issues that gives them. But if you have any further questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Kate, for including that Thames Water condition. Much appreciated. I know that I had some concerns as well. I've spoken to Kate at length about this, and I know I had some concerns about the land raising, and that's subject to an enforcement action. So my concerns are, one is on the bridge across the across the Nuthurst stream, which I see under that is going to be which is condition 8, which are full details are going to be submitted. And afterwards, the bridge before, we've had this problem with this site before, in that the bridge specification they issued on the previous, which I think was 2.1, or that actually then completely changed in all guises to what it was first meant to be. And I really just want officers to be very mindful that this is, there can't be land raising associated with this bridge as well, because that has been, specifically the Environment Agency said that couldn't happen. And I just want assurances from officers that there will be no further land raising associated with this bridge. The other query that I have is that that we talk about the felling of an oak tree, which seems to be unavoidable, which I think could be completely avoidable, but it wasn't raised. Obviously, well, it was raised previously when this came before us, when we were very upset about the size of the rooms, and it got sent back, and they have complied now with the technical space standards. But we've got the felling of the tree. We've also got the fact that the Surrey Wildlife Trust say there are additional surveys, yes, VAT surveys, that need to be carried out. And in line with obviously complying with their condition 25 of the outline. But my very big concern is that this will be done the wrong way round. We can't approve the felling of the tree in this application without stating that that must happen after we have carried out the necessary bat surveys. Because otherwise what's going to happen is they're going to fell the tree, won't matter whether there's any bats in there, and then they'll carry out the bat surveys. So I want assurances that the surveys will be carried out first before the felling of this tree will allow. Also, I'm very pleased to see that the length's now included in the conditions, but there were certain things that, again, Surrey Wildlife said about the measurable net gain, and being able to measure that, and I would like that included specifically in the LEMP, to say that we will comply with the be able to measure the net gain in biodiversity, and also with regards to the EV charging points, it doesn't seem to mention in our condition 3 that these will be, normally we have this sort of standard condition that it says there'll be fast charging and all that. And I just want to make sure that they will be the ones we normally require, however many kilowatts and whatever they are. So they're my points at the moment. I'm concerned about obviously about the bridge and the land raising, the order of the felling of the tree, including with the LEMP, the measurable net gain in biodiversity, and also the EV charging points, and making sure they're the ones we would like. I do also concur with Councillor Earls about the affordable housing. However, on this site, I'm sure you remember that the phase 1 was all big executive homes and not affordable home in sight. So they keep kicking, you know, the can down the road, so to speak. Thank you.
Kate, do you want to comment on those points?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Cole, and thank you, Councillor Townsend, for the questions. In relation to the issue around the bridge over Nuthurst Stream and whether land raising will be proposed as part of that, this matter is fully secured by the outline consent. That consent includes conditions not just for details and provision of the bridge over the stream, but also for details of any changes in land levels within the site from that which was originally agreed within the outline. So should they propose to make any changes to the land levels there, they would need to be subject to our full detailed review, but your comments are noted for when we get to the stage of looking to discharge that application for discharge of the condition for the details of the bridge. In relation to the oak tree felling, I would say that our trees officer hasn't stated an objection in relation to this application to the loss of any individual trees. In relation to the ecological surveys, and I think as we discussed, the original outline condition required further surveys to be undertaken for both badgers and bats prior to the commencement of the development. Since we spoke, Councillor Townsend, I've looked through our discharge of condition record and I've seen that condition was discharged prior to the commencement of phase 1, and because that condition isn't prior to every phase, it's just prior to the commencement of development over the wider scheme. It's not something which would be necessary for them going forward. So I suppose in that respect, it's similar to if there were a site where somebody starts development and then doesn't choose to finish the whole development for a number of years, the length of time that may pass from the original surveys may increase, but nonetheless the original planning decision would be there and couldn't be repealed in relation to ecological impacts. And in relation to the LEMP condition, in relation to a measurable biodiversity net gain, I have excluded that from the recommended condition because from my understanding of the local policy context, I didn't think we could reasonably require that as being necessary for planning purposes through the condition. But I don't know whether my colleagues would have any comments on that. So I think that covers all of your questions, Councillor Townsend. Thank you.
Sorry, it was the order of the tree felling and the surveys. Did you cover that? Sorry, Kate, if I missed that. But it was the fact that, yes, I know that tree's been identified to fell. It was just to make sure that the additional surveys, which the Surrey Wildlife Trust have clearly identified, are carried out prior to the tree. Or are you saying no surveys whatsoever, extra surveys will be done on this site? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying yes. As I read Surrey Wildlife Trust comments, they're commenting on the requirements under the original outline consent to submit further surveys prior to commencement of the wider consent, and they have submitted those surveys now, so that that pre-commencement requirement has been discharged.
Okay,
notwithstanding that, the applicant is obliged to, comply with the habitat regulations with regards to the protection of protected species.
Thank you. I'd still like to know about the biodiversity net gain. Sorry, Chairman. I would still like to know the answer to that and why we would even want to not include it or could not include it. Thank you.
I mean, I would say it's requiring it to be measured, which would probably be in accordance with the matrix, is quite an onerous requirement, which as it stands, I'm not confident that we could reasonably support. I don't know if my colleagues have any further comments on that.
Is anyone going to? No, it seems. But just on the point that Councillor Townsend raised about, I think it was about surveys on this particular tree. I mean, this developer has taken a long time to get this point. It's you know, these this work goes back a long time now. It seems to me that if a tree is going to be felled, then some sort of sanity check that something hasn't changed in the meantime would be appropriate, rather than relying on a survey that was probably done 5 or 6 years ago. Do you know when this relevant survey was done? That's probably an unfair question.
Sorry, apologies, Councillor Cole. In relation to the surveys which were required, the further surveys which were required to be submitted by the outline consent, they were approved, I believe, in 2017. Whilst I appreciate your concerns, ultimately they have the consent as it stands. Notwithstanding that, if you felt it was a very key issue that was central and went to the heart of your approval of the application, we could consider whether a condition could be included. But in my view, it's not warranted. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come back on the point? I'm sorry but the biodiversity net gain, that has been recommended by the Surrey Wildlife Trust, and they actually say Natural England advised that any net gain should be fully secured and funded for the lifetime of development. We therefore advise that the above reference length should include an appropriately detailed assessment to demonstrate that a measurable net gain secured for the lifetime of the development will be achieved. This document should be submitted to the Council for approval in writing prior to commencement of development. Now, the Surrey Wildlife Trust are one of our consultees. If we are going to ignore, I would like to know a very good basis for why we are going, not just be met with silence. I want to know the basis of why we are not including that within this application. It's been specifically asked for by the Surrey Wildlife Trust, and that is in the email dated the 30th of June. So it's not ages ago. You know, I'm not happy with that response, actually.
Lewis or Zach, do you want to comment on whether this is an appropriate thing to put in at this stage? Either Lewis or Zach are still online.
Oh yeah, no, of course I'm still online. Sorry, I just have my video. I mean, ultimately, it's you know, you're the decision makers. If you feel that to approve that you're unable to approve the reserve matters without including that condition, then you know, obviously. That's an option open to you to insist that that's part of the approval, as worded in the Surrey Wildlife Trust's advice. I mean, the biodiversity net gain is rather a new concept for us as local authorities, and it was only sort of consulted on last year by central government, but it is certainly something that's coming through as something that they want to encourage from new developments. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, we've had I presume we've had a recommendation from, well, no, that's not true, actually. Councillor Townsend hasn't yet sort of said whether or not she'd be prepared to move that. But I think if members were minded to grant permission, it sounds very much she would like to include that, the condition as suggested by Surrey Wildlife Trust, and that's within your gift as members.
I would like to propose that, Chairman, and specifically, you know, we always are told that these people are the experts and we are meant to listen to the experts. And when they make a condition that says we should include it, I mean, I tend to take notice. I know that within our own, you know, the expertise within our own planning, you know, we have got some expertise, but not the same expertise as the Surrey Wildlife Trust, which is why we consult with them. So I would definitely like to propose that, and I hope I have a seconder. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. The first point I was going to raise, actually, Councillor Else stole my thunder. It appears we're more concerned about the operationability to deal with clustered affordable housing rather than potential social isolation. I can't understand why just to travel an extra 50 yards on an estate is, you know, makes it an operational problem. I really cannot understand why they haven't dealt with this better. We've been banging on about this all this time. It was refused last time and they've clustered again. So I can't support it for that reason. But the other point I just want to raise is the financial contributions, which is page 66. And I just don't want Waverley to fall foul. There's a contribution of 23,345 for recycling bins in Cranley. And I look probably to Councillor Follows on this one, that this actually would totally contradict the executive decision, I believe it's been made, to remove these. I would hate for us to follow through on a financial agreement that we actually can't follow through. So I might be wrong on that, but I just think we need to be very careful that we're asking for money that contradicts a policy that we potentially have got. But going back to my original point, I have to support Councillor Ellis on this one. We've worked really hard on affordable housing and its locations. They've made little effort. Whether we can make a condition that says the location of affordable housing to be agreed with the local authority, that may be a way around it, but if not, I couldn't support it. So I look forward to Kate's views on that. Thank you, Chair.
I think, Christina, it sounds rather hard to make that a condition since it's so baked into the scheme. But Kate, do you want to come on?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Dinas. I would agree with what Councillor Cole has just said. The applicant has provided a detailed housing schedule with the application, which clearly identifies whether each plot would be affordable or private. So it is very much built into the scheme. If the committee overall felt that was an issue on which you would otherwise refuse permission, then there would also be another option of excuse me, deferring to invite the applicant to consider whether they wish to seek to amend the location of their proposed affordable housing. But as I said, I don't expect that they would be willing to do it given the existing relationship they have with an RP. So I think probably it would only be prudent to go down that route if it was definitely something that you would otherwise refuse on, and if officers had the authority to, or rather officers were instructed to refuse were the amendments not forthcoming. Thank you.
I feel very. Can I just come in, Chairman? I feel very comfortable with that idea. I mean, I think you need to vote as members on the proposals that are before you tonight. We've had our housing. We've got a registered provider who's happy with the location. We appreciate that the mix isn't ideal in terms of tenure mix in this phase, but it will be across the whole development. So I would urge members to just take a vote on what's before you tonight rather than seeking to overcomplicate matters on this particular phase. I just wanted to come back on the point about net measurable gain, measurable net gain, biodiversity gain. Because I may be going mad, but on the update sheet, page 34, under condition 16 of the revised conditions that's proposed for this application, one of the requirements as part of the LEMP, the Landscape and Ecological Management Plan, is that they provide an appropriately detailed assessment to demonstrate a measurable net gain secured for the lifetime of the development will be achieved, and then they're required to provide those either before first occupation or in phasing agreed within the document. So I think it's already covered. I mean, from my perspective, if members were to approve the development which we're recommending is approved in accordance with the conditions as set out on the amendment sheet, revision sheet.
Sorry, Zach, which update sheet was that? What page?
It's page 34.
Yeah, it's the very last condition.
It's condition 16. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm a bit confused because I've just picked this up, and obviously it was in the officer's recommendation, so it is there.
That's the reason it's not included in the actual condition itself. That's not what was put within the Surrey Wildlife Trust. They specifically put in, so that is just the reason why you've used that condition. That condition does not state. I would like it to firm it up then, please, Zach. And using the wording that Surrey Wildlife Trust have actually put in, please.
Well, we could take that out of condition 16 and add it as a separate condition 17. Specifically about that, if you felt that was required. You know, it's you know, there is an MPPF paragraph, the 170D, I understand, that covers biodiversity net gain. So look, you know, I would be comfortable if members wanted to separate that and have it as a condition as set out by Surrey Wildlife Trust, and we could add that in as condition 17.
Okay, let's try and move on. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to continue on from the points that Councillors Else and Dean has made on the affordable housing, but from a slightly different tack. I'm concerned that much of the overall obligation for the whole development is being discharged here by creating a concentration of affordable housing at the furthest point of the estate from the facilities in Cranley, so that the occupants who can least afford cars are confronted with the furthest journeys. What we don't want is creation of estates within estates. So that, to me, the point I just made could be lessened in importance if cycling and walking provision were better. Except that in the fullness of time, a route is going to be created through the finished estate, and then the problem will be much lessened. But who knows how long that's actually going to take to materialise. In the near term, as far as I can see, cyclists and pedestrians are going to have a return journey to Cranley of over 3 kilometres until the whole site is opened up. Now, that could be more than halved if a route to the Downs Link could be opened up to the northeast of the site, just outside of phase 2.2. You've got the Downs Link as a major recreational resource only just to the north of the site. Unfortunately, the transport statement makes no mention of this possibility, rather accentuating the excellence of the cycle provision onto the site from Alfold Road, but then expecting cyclists to battle with cars on Alfold Road further north. So for cyclists and pedestrians wishing to access Cranley, there's a need to go around 3 sides of a square, adding considerable distance to the journey and significantly reducing sustainability. So, you know, with our declaration of climate emergency in Waverley, I would suggest that this potentially solvable reduction in sustainability could be addressed. Having recently visited the Amlets Lane development where the same issue exists, I'm not inclined to continue supporting unsustainable solutions in potentially sustainable positions for our less affluent residents. You know, we create super housing and then people have to go awfully long routes or circuitous routes to get to a point that they could actually get to much quicker if a bit of thought was addressed at this stage. So specifically, I think this application stands, contradicts local plan policy CC3, which says that the council will seek to promote sustainable patterns of development and reduce the level of greenhouse gas emissions by, and it's covered by point 3, by designing to encouraging walking, cycling and access to sustainable forms of transport. So I appreciate that what I'm talking about here is access and it's not a reserved matter, but layout is. And to me, only by resolving a means of access to the Downs Link in the short term would make this affordable housing arrangements sustainable for pedestrians and cyclists to use. So, if a solution could be found, I'm very happy with most of what we're being presented with tonight. But it really worries me that we've created a position here where this increased level of affordable housing on phase 2.2 is not as sustainable as it should be. And I think I'm going to struggle to support it. But thank you, Chairman.
So, Councillor, you aren't making a proposal, you're just noting a problem and the fact you will you may not support. You haven't got anything to suggest which might relieve that in the short term.
I welcome it if officers could come up with a solution. I mean, to me, if the affordable housing could be brought closer to Cranley by finding some access to the Downs link in the northeast corner of the site, then that would change my whole view on this. But at the moment, it would be interesting to hear if officers were to comment on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, if I could comment, Councillor Cole, whilst we recognise that during the build-out phase, the routes into Cranley would be harder for all occupiers of this phase of the development, including the private occupiers who would be occupying it, that would only be temporary, and it would improve once the access road through phases 3 and 4 come forward. In terms of the suggestion of connecting into the Downs link, whilst that would be a very good solution if it were possible, the site doesn't directly adjoin the Downs link, so there isn't the possibility to provide that in this portion.
Is it not? So there are on the north side. There is north edge. There's a house isn't in the way. Is that's the issue? Is it?
Yes, as I understand it, the site adjoins houses and residential curtilage, and the Hewitts industrial estate to the north, rather than the Downs link, although it is in very close proximity.
Okay, let's try and get to the last few comments and get to vote on this, because it's you've been going for 3 hours now. So, Councillor Darcy.
I'd just like to commend Councillor Seaborn. I thought I agree with almost everything he said. My concern was a little bit about climate change from the point of view of CC1 and CC2 again. Seem to be no elements of the design, layout, orientation and landscaping to address minimising energy use and reducing emissions. I noticed, for example, in the image of the block elevation that there were chimneys. There didn't appear to be any solar panels. So that's, I mean, where do I start? It's just insane. We've talked about the biodiversity, and that seems to be well covered with the LEMP. It's always disappointing that the LEMPs are never available for these meetings. I presume that's because it's to do with the whole development rather than just this one portion. But this seems to be a recurring theme where we're told there will be a LEMP, but we never get to see it. And I prefer to make a decision based on all the information. And finally, I think it would be interesting to see if the Surrey vernacular could ever be modernised or developed, because we are in danger of having a sort of frozen design of house which will never change, and it's always going to be this red brick with tiles, and all the modern materials that we've got and all the ways we could make houses more energy efficient really require us to start changing what they look like. And I think we need to start taking that into consideration in the future, perhaps not in this development, but certainly for future ones of a similar size. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Right, thank you, Chair. I agree, and I will support Councillor Townsend, and hope that Surrey Wildlife will be, the condition will be included in condition 17 to support that much more. There are, of course, public footpaths we haven't discussed, but they are all around Cranley and can be made use of. But I agree with Councillor Seaborn and thank him for mentioning the fact that the whole site, my initial concern about the whole of this site, but named the Berkeley site, was the fact that people were going to be divided up. In fact, there was once at the very beginning of the application an idea that the first section that has been built, and that's already happened, was the site butting onto Knoll Lane, and they were not wanting a through road. So that in itself made a barrier between the affordables and the the more expensive homes. They didn't want a route through, and that has gone right back to the Oldfold Road, and there seem to be clusters of these affordable homes, and I believe the site goes on to Littlemead and Hewitt, which again will be more affordable homes. So there is this clustering of people who can't afford or may have to socially have socially rented properties, and I agree that there should be a better mix. I also agree with Councillor Darcy about solar panels, but it's not just that, it's orienteering the houses, especially the ones that are maybe more affordable, so they have the sunlight getting into the rooms to warm the whole house up. That's a sort of simple thing to do, I would have thought, and a garden that faces south, so that the children can play out in the sunshine, with kitchens looking over, so that whoever's working in the kitchen, and I won't be sexist here, can supervise the children. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just several short comments and a question. Obviously, this is a bit of a deja vu application because we've seen bits and pieces of this come back and forth, and we have to place quite a lot of trust that things that have been deferred now will definitely come back in later phases. And we've clearly got things out of this developer, but we've had to push at every stage. I don't feel like a lot of it's been particularly voluntary, and so I'm inclined to say that we should continue to push again and try and get more out of it, as a number of others have alluded. Bravo, Councillor Darcy, 100% agree with you. That is the sort of change that is required. We have to make bold changes in design if we're going to move forward on this. I absolutely support that. And it is a great shame that so many of the opportunities that we might have got at the outline stage, where some of the sustainability points that Councillor Seaborn was making were effectively squandered at that point by them not being included or pushed at that time, leading us to be slightly stuck in some respects to the layout and design of this particular property. A number of us were members of a working group on the potential prejudice around affordable housing and social housing last year, of which Councillor Townsend was its chair. And so I know cross-party there is a definite realisation of if the registered provider is concerned that they're too scattered and that becomes too expensive, they may start to argue viability, and that may actually decrease the number of affordable housing at all. And as much as pepper potting is a problem, clustering is a problem, it is a problem that those with the luxury of having housing have, and not the ones that need the housing have. And I think we probably have to put a little bit of perspective on that when we're talking about this. My final comment is to actually just recognise something that Councillor Dean has said. He is quite right, and the original reason I put my hand up was to flag a question to officers on the contributions to recycling. Obviously, it is at the moment nascent policy to change the usage of bring sites across Waverley. And so my question to officers is the money allocated to increasing recycling facilities in Cranley, recycling bins in Cranley. I take that to mean things like the bring sites. If we stop that as a thing, can this money be used for something in the sustainability and environmental sphere more broadly, or is it very specifically tied to recycling? Thank you, Chair.
And I'll just come back very quickly on that point. If the funds required by the outline are for specific things, and if we have no need for that specific thing anymore, then we would be required by the original legal agreement to return that fund to the developer. Thank you.
That sounds like a problem, doesn't it?
Chair, if I may, then I would like to request, is the report a paraphrasing of the legal agreement as to what it says, or is that exactly what it says in terms of recycling bins?
I don't believe it's verbatim, no.
Right.
But these things do unfortunately happen with legal agreements over time, that some of the things which we originally secured, when it comes to it, can't continue to be secured. so that would be what may happen if we didn't have an appropriate other use, which could reasonably be linked to the wording of the detail clause.
Okay.
Zach, do you want to comment? Zach, you want to comment, please? Perhaps Zach could comment with the microphone on. It would assist.
That would help, obviously, yes. Chairman. Can I just ask for a couple of minutes, because I should be able to find the section 106 online and check that. So I'd rather give you the full picture of exactly what it says regarding the recycling facilities. If you'll just indulge me for 2 minutes and perhaps continue whatever. Well, is that right?
Yeah, we'll move on. Councillor Townsend, you want to come back briefly, perhaps?
Yes, Chairman, I will try to be very brief. I was going to reiterate what Councillor Follows says about the affordable housing. Unfortunately, having talked to quite a few registered providers, if it's too scattered, it's too expensive for them to maintain, and viability will come into it. With Councillor Seaborn about the access to the Downs Link, unfortunately, because of the development of the Hewitts Industrial Estate, which wraps around this development, even if there was access to the Downs Link, it would be temporarily rerouted because of the Hewitts Industrial Estate. However, there is an option right on the corner of the Hewitts, potentially for some permeability between these two sites. And it would be great if officers could, when sites are coming side by side, if that permeability between the sites could be looked at, and whether or not there is an option in the very corner. But it may not be, obviously, the people who live there may not want people being able to, what one might call, traipse through. So that may be why. Saying about the road going through, unfortunately, because it would then, from one side of the site, Knoll Lane, over to Allfold Road, the reason why it is cut off in the middle, I'm sure, is because it would have just been used as a bypass for the high street. And to be honest, it would have been dangerous for people living there with the amount of cars that would have gone through there. And with the recycling, believe you me, we won't lose that money. We'll have recycling bins of some shape or form. We won't lose that 23,000, I can assure you, unless Zach tells me otherwise.
We'll move on to the last comment. Councillor Higgin.
I just want to make the observation that there's 100,000 designated for surface and lighting improvements to the Downs Link. So presumably someone was envisaging that there would be access from this site onto the Downs Link.
There's loads of access, Joan, absolutely loads. It's in the other phases.
Oh, I see. All right.
Okay, let's try and, I've got no more hands up. So we're waiting on Zach to read his section 106 and comment.
Could I ask you to let Councillor... Oh, he's back in.
Oh, sorry. I am back now. My apologies, but the whole thing died and I got kicked out.
Oh, right, sorry. I think we're just trying to answer the point as to whether the wording that we're agreeing tonight is in any way binding in terms of disbursement of money, or is it just commentary?
Thank you. That'd be very useful, Chair. Thank you.
Zach, are you going to be able to answer this question, or are you?
Yes, I've just loaded it up. Sorry. Let me just. Yeah.
Okay. While you're doing that, I understood that there was a. Did we agree? I guess the question to Kate. Kate, do you have a rewording of the last condition, condition 16, which refers to the LEMP, which brings on board the points that were mentioned, I think, by various people?
And yes, to clarify, as I understand from what you're saying, Councillor Townsend, you are asking for the statement which Surrey Wildlife Trust made, that adding on a tailpiece, as it were, to the condition as I've recommended, to say proposals for net gain should be clearly recorded and reported through use of an appropriate metric, such as the DEFRA biodiversity metric 2.0, in order to demonstrate that the LEMP will result in a measurable net gain for biodiversity. If you could confirm that that was your expectation in terms of the motion, that would be appreciated. I believe that was what we were discussing.
Thank you, Kate. So yes, so that's the last paragraph there, as you've read it out, and therefore, but also that the measurable net gain should be secured for the lifetime of the development, and obviously the document should be submitted to the council for approval. I think you've got that bit, the approval in writing prior to commencement.
Okay, is that clear, Kate?
Yes, thank you. So I think, Councillor Townsend, the part you're referring there to say appropriately detailed, that's in effect Surrey Wildlife Trust discussing what they would like to see, which is included within the above recommended condition, which isn't in bold. So I presume that wouldn't be included because the prior to commencement requirements is within the original condition.
Yeah, yes, I think that bit is already, as I said, I think that bit's already been included in the main LEMP condition itself.
So I believe so far that's the only amendment to the conditions
for the lifetime of the development. Thank you.
Yeah,
I believe that's so. Anyway, so Zach, right, you've read
yes, I'll read it out. So recycling contribution. This is in the definitions in the Section 106 agreement. Says recycling contribution means the sum of £23,345 index linked, so it's a lot more than that, well, quite a bit more than that now, towards improvements to the capacity of recycling bins in the village of Cranley. And I have no doubt that Councillor Townsend will be more than able to spend that in accordance with the terms of the Section 106. So I don't think members need worry themselves that that will be lost.
Very reassured, thank you, Zach. Okay. I'm sure Liz can spend it.
So I think, Councillor Goodridge, do you have something else to say?
No, I was just going to say that what's in the 106 we're stuck with. Zach's read it out, and we'll use an imaginative way to make quite sure we have it.
Thank you. In that case, the recommendation is that, and we're referring here to subject conditions 1 to 16 in the update sheet that was sent this afternoon, as amended with regards to the LEMP that was discussed a moment ago, and informatives 1 to 19, which presumably are as in the agenda paper, permission be granted. So that's the motion. So Kimberly, could you start the vote, please? Hang on a moment, Councillor Hegan. Sorry, hang on a moment. Councillor Hegan, do you have a question about the vote now?
I have a question, sorry.
I'm sorry, some of us have voted, Chairman. We were in the middle of a vote.
No, the vote's been started now. Please.
Well, it was just about the EV fast charging points.
Well, you asked to vote.
No.
Wasn't it meant
the vote was called, Chairman.
Thames Water as well.
Please vote.
I think it's very pertinent that we include Thames Water, Chairman.
Yeah, I think we can take that as read. That's not controversial.
Thank you.
Kimberly, I've lost my voting thing because I couldn't unmute without getting rid of the voting screen.
So just indicate your vote by are you voting for or against?
I'm voting for.
Thank you.
So with Councillor Hegan voting for, that's 10 votes for, 2 against and 3 abstentions.
Thank you. Right, thank you, members. That was a long session, and thank you for your patience. I believe there's nothing to exclude the press and public, so in which case we are at the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, officers.
Richard. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Richard.